Save the Semantics, episode 119. It is July 11th, 2020. My name is Myro. This is the podcast where I ramble on about shit. Things that have been going on in my life, which is not a whole lot, and things that are going on out and about in the world, in which there are a lot of things going on at the moment. It's really hot out. I'll just make note of that. I always pick, it's either, a good time, or it's just not a good time, to record an episode, I always do it in sort of in an outdoor setting. Right now it's about 85 degrees out. Found a relatively secluded area where I won't be distracted by other people, but I am still uncomfortable, and by the end of this, I will be just drenched in sweat. I know that. I'm under coverage, I have plenty of shade, but it's still just, the humidity is brutal, for sure, but just wanted to get an episode out, at least by this weekend, just for the sake of consistency and all that. And also I have some things that I do want to sort of talk about. But yeah, it's been again, this week's just kind of been same old. I feel like I say that every time, but I think like last week I was just sort of talking about sort of like the cabin fever-esque feeling that I was having, and it sort of has kind of persisted into this next week. I've definitely felt like, I don't know, it's been kind of, up and down like usual, and I think most people can kind of attest to that, but yeah, I've been trying my best to sort of keep things level, just kind of maintain a decent, agenda or decent schedule in place. Because I feel like, I mean, that's sort of like, the thing about me is that if I don't have some form of consistency, and that also comes in the form of this podcast too. It's like if I don't do this weekly, I feel like I have kind of like a hole, or I feel like there's something kind of missing in my day-to-day or my week-to-week life basis, so if I have that consistency, not just with this, but in other parts as well, I feel like I can kind of keep myself in check for the most part, That's like the one thing, despite my last quarter being all online, I feel like for the most part I had a bit of cohesion, I wasn't a big fan of it, of course. I think everybody was just sort of, struck back by just the significant change it was in the learning experience. But, I mean, for the most part, I felt like I had a hold on things. I had something that I had to work on. I had, collaborations in class, even if it wasn't a whole lot. I still feel like that was, something, right? Like, even if you aren't the biggest fan of group projects, like I'm not the biggest fan of them, they still add a little something, right? They add some form of connection, you could say, even if you aren't necessarily friends with these people, but it kind of enhances kind of social connectivity. I think that's the biggest thing. That's that's obviously the biggest thing that's sort of taken a backseat in all of this, is just sort of the ability to keep in contact with people, and I've talked about this before, just with changes, over the course of these, last 4 years, transitioning into college and now out of it, just kind of maintaining those connections with people. can be difficult. I've been kind of watching these videos, sort of talking about like the effect that this pandemic has had on people's ability to maintain relationships, friendships, and that sort of thing. I'm definitely, one of those people who've sort of felt that way. That it's just been difficult to kind of maintain those things, considering that while you may be while you may have the ability to do it through like things like Zoom, or you could FaceTime people, like it's still kind of hard to do it without, you know, keeping contact in the physical realm, So, that's definitely something that's been kind of slowly nagging at me a little bit, Like I've acknowledged it for sure, but it's not something that I can necessarily just ignore because it's such a huge factor in what it means to kind of be, you know, just doing things on like a day-to-day basis, right? Like just having those human connections and all that, definitely aid you. Just keeping, just being like level-headed and all that. So yeah, that's something that's kind of been on my mind recently. But I've tried my best to sort of keep in contact with people, and that sort of thing. And with kind of things going forward, I, I hope that other people are able to kind of do the same, and just sort of, keep in touch with people. Like it's kind of, it's vital in some sense to do that, especially now, just because you're not going to be able to see most people in person. And I've just kind of been, I've been trying to be more cautious recently, even more than just kind of ever, just considering how much, the case is going up everywhere in the U.S., and even kind of where I live. It's so I just, I want to try my best to kind of stay safe as possible, and with that, the sort of the consequence of that is just not being able to keep in contact with people, So yeah, I think that's something that's going to be, and I might have brought this up before, but this whole experience, of course, there's the socioeconomic costs of the whole ordeal, but just the interpersonal consequences of this whole situation is definitely going to kind of lead to like what I believe is going to be just kind of a shift in culture, and it's already kind of been sort of that way, and where people meet people via online, whether it's like through video games or if you're using like a dating app and that sort of thing. Like that's kind of been more normalized, at least for a while now, and I think just sort of this, the social distancing and all that has definitely kind of further shown that like this is kind of something that's going to be a normal kind of thing, Yeah, it's just going to be an interesting thing to kind of see, even from my own lens, just sort of, because I've definitely like noticed sort of like my own sort of change in behavior when it comes to like interacting with people and that sort of thing. And I think that, of course it's good to maintain that distance of 6 feet, wear a mask, and all that and that sort of thing, but, yeah, I just think my own sort of way of interacting with people and that sort of thing is gonna definitely be like shifting, you know, definitely be different by like the end of this year for sure. Like regardless of whether a vaccine comes out and this whole, you know, pandemic gets eradicated and whatnot. But yeah, that's been sort of on my mind. I've been trying my best to keep up with the news. And I try to maintain sort of a healthy dosage of the news and that sort of thing. Like, I don't want to overconsume because then I just will just that's just not good for you at all. And I've talked about that a bunch of times, but especially now where it sort of feels like people are getting a little too comfortable in in this setting. I just like it's kind of disheartening to see like people in restaurants kind of eating out and that sort of thing. Like I understand the incentive for these businesses to have their outdoor or like outdoor dining areas open just because more people will likely come and support their business and stay for the food and whatnot. But I just don't. It sucks, just because like I all the measures that have taken place, leading on to now, where I don't know, people are just sort of like, it is what it is. And it's not though. It is. I mean, it is what it is to an extent, but it's just not. I just like I really don't want to take these. I really don't want to take this whole situation lightly, amongst just everything going on. Um, it is really strange, just sort of like I mean like I'm sort of I was kind of like in that field too. Like at the very beginning, like people were very much concerned about their health. Like it seemed like the majority of people. I mean, this is just kind of from my own anecdotal perspective, but it seemed like more people were concerned about this pandemic when the cases were very, very low, and now that we've essentially hit like an all-time high of new cases every day. Like people are just kind of doing their own thing, and like it's obviously like a thing of where we've just kind of become conditioned to live in this state, and because the federal government has just not, they just haven't given a shit about what people are doing, or they just don't really give a shit in general. They've kind of allowed these things to kind of go on without really any strict, you know, like, strict protocols. And, you can look at a lot of the conservative states like Florida, and Texas that have had like huge surges in cases. I mean, California too, of course. But places where like the governors have just been very anti-mask, anti science and that sort of thing, and just sort of have let things go on, and then just kind of you see the consequences of that, and it sucks. I actually just watched this one lecture from a professor from my university. He's currently studying the disease, and he was talking about how just like how quickly this virus can spread. And I think this has been kind of available information for a while now, but now that it's been about 4-5 months into the pandemic, there's data that shows sort of actually how quickly the virus can really spread, and it's just like there's just more reason for me to not take a risk and not go out or whatever, go out only when it's necessary. And I'm sort of I'm very cautious to even like exercise too. Like I was thinking of going on like a run instead of doing this today, but maybe it's just me being paranoid. Maybe it's just me being like overcautious, but there's just I don't know. There's too much of a probability of risk that I might catch something, just because a lot of other people have the same idea of just going out and about. So yeah, I'm trying my best to stay safe, keep my family safe, keep my friends safe, all that. And I hope that I don't know. It's hard. I've talked to this with a few friends, just how a lot of people are just not gonna ever change their mind, and it's hard to really convince. Like those are the people. Like I understand, like some people might be on the fence, and those people, it will be more it will be easier to convince them to take precautionary risks, wear a mask, stay indoors and that sort of thing. But people who are so, brainwashed to the fact that maybe this disease is a conspiracy constructed by the Democrats and that sort of thing, I just don't know where to even go with these people. I just don't think, and this is, pessimistic, but it's also, also feel like it's kind of, it's real too, where no level of education, no level of scientific evidence is going to convince them of the fact that this disease isn't, a conspiracy, because they've just been so, I don't know, they've been conditioned in their spaces, their own bubbles, right? People who live in more conservative areas, or people that are, just pure Trump supporters, they just don't believe in this case because, their leader essentially has been so explicitly anti-science and all that. So I don't know. When this is all kind of said and done, I don't know if it really ever will be. This is going to have, you know, like huge impacts and implications for future generations and just kind of, future years going on. I just don't know, like, how we're going to be able to sort of reverse this tide. I am hopeful for sure. I'm just kind of, I'm just sort of being kind of, pessimistic because there's just not a whole lot of signs showing that a lot of these people are going to really ever change, right? Just because they're just not willing to believe in fact. They just don't believe in reality to an extent. And I don't know what to do with these people. Like, not me personally, but like I don't know what we as like a society can really do about these people who refuse to take facts. And of course, like I think it's very important to like question the information that is given to us. Like, even like if the CDC tells us a certain thing, like I think it's good to be skeptical. It's good to kind of question their sources, do more research, and kind of, you know, put all this information together to be like, okay, so there's a consensus that masks are a good thing and that they are good preventative tools, and that social distancing is also a good thing because you are less likely to contract the disease with, minimal contact and that sort of thing. But most people, or not most people, but people that are on that side, the far right side, they're not going to do that. They're only going to take information that benefits their own sort of state of well-being. And it's just kind of, it sucks to see that. And I just don't really like, it's hard to be sympathetic for these people because like there's no real sense of like, care. They just don't really care, right? I previously said that, you know, people that, people will not believe this virus is a real thing until they or a family member gets infected. But I'm sort of kind of want to retract that statement because I've seen, you know, I've seen, I watched like an interview of someone during like the Trump rally in Tulsa where they talked about like a family member dying from the disease, and they didn't do anything about it. they just kind of went about like it was just sort of a thing, like, oh, it's just, my family member died from a thing similar to the flu and it's not as bad as it could be. And I just don't, like, I don't understand. I don't know. It's hard to really put your, headspace in theirs, but yeah, it's just like, I'm just kind of retracting that statement because like people do not care even if they are infected. Like there's just been, I've seen a lot of posts just sort of talking about this sort of thing, and some people do actually, you know, believe in the severity of this disease, once they do get infected. But some people just don't. Like they just don't think it's. They just continued to deny, and I just don't like. I think that sort of mentality, that sort of state of mind is just so like kind of rooted in this country. I don't want to get too like into like, you know, I mean, I'm kind of already there just discussing this whole thing, but I think that people just are so they just so want to believe that everything that they do is good, right? Like there's a sense of individualism which, promotes your own kind of beliefs. Like if you are going up against the majority, you are kind of your own patriot in a sense, right? How, they view people, Trump supporters view Trump as this sort of underdog figure, and they just sort of believe in everything that their base kind of spins up, like there's just no, there's no, there's not even like a hint of curiosity within them. So yeah, that's just kind of depressing, right? But it's sort of, I think moving forward, these types of people, like regardless of what they believe, I think that in order for there to be change, it just has to be this steamroll effect of advocacy and change, and I think that sort of has been in effect with the protests that are, I believe, still going on, right? Like that's just sort of has to come with that movement, like a movement of pro science, pro education, right? Like I don't want to spew too much of this thing, but it's like it is, like I feel like it's beneficial to have these things in place. Like I just like I've definitely like during college, like of course, like I've been exposed to a lot of these ideas going to a university that's very liberal. But I think even during college, I wasn't even really all of that, like, into, like, political advocacy for the most part. And I've mentioned before, like, sort of like the apathy and apathetic kind of behavior that I've sort of, presented just because, like, it hasn't, these kinds of things hasn't necessarily affected me, like, certain cases of like police brutality and that sort of thing. Like these are ideas that weren't really commonplace in my own life, so I sort of had the ability to kind of push those things to the side, even though I had full knowledge that these things were occurring. Like I just didn't necessarily take them with the level of sincerity or seriousness that I do now, So just with everything going on, I've definitely shifted much more towards kind of much more in stance with education, very like liberal ideas, again, like I've had I've held these beliefs for a while now, but it's just now that I'm kind of being a little more like, I guess, somewhat vocal about it. I'm trying to. When it comes to like social media posting, I'm still very like I'm not very good at posting, or at least I feel like I'm not very good at posting certain things, right? Like I want to try to like inform people that are followers or my friends about things, about certain things, point them toward a direction that might be beneficial, that might, help them learn about something, and in the process help people that are affected by certain things. But I just like, I also want to be careful about the things that I wanted to post. And I always like, I feel like with every post that I've made, whether it's on my story or whatever, I've always kind of regretted it. Like, even if it might have been, you know, well intentioned, or even if it was like, like a fine thing to post, like, I still kind of regret it because, like, I feel like it might have sent like the wrong message in some way. I don't know how. Like, I don't think, like, I don't think most of my posts are pretty clear for the most part, but I still regret it to some degree just because I feel like maybe some aspect of it could be like kind of flipped on its head. So I've been trying to be careful. I've seen a lot of other people posting a lot more sufficient information or just making more clear posts. So I sort of just kind of want to, like, not stay quiet, but I want to be careful of sort of muddying the waters or whatever, just because like I feel like I can, I can contribute to the conversation, of course, but like I also don't want to send the wrong message, essentially. So I'll still, I'll still post, of course, but I also just want to be more careful when it comes to posting certain things because I don't want to, again, send the wrong message or maybe, you know, intentionally hurt someone, by posting that image. And yeah, so I've just kind of been very careful in that regard. I've been trying to be more cautious when it comes to that kind of thing. So yeah, a lot of things kind of to discuss. I really feel like um, I think with like a healthier, habit of like schedule consistency, I think it comes with being able to actually talk about more things. I've definitely noticed that for sure. Like, things are pretty, shit right now. I can definitely say that. And things are definitely tough. And it's hard to kind of look at certain stories, look at the amount of cases and the amount of deaths that have just been kind of going up. Reading stories about how the ICUs are at full capacity and just sort of the awful conditions that medical staff have to work with. It's hard. It's like, it's disheartening to read these kinds of things, but it is important to be aware of these things as well, right? Just to kind of keep it in perspective. And I think that kind of thing also leads me to be very cautious and to kind of try to put things in perspective. I feel like I'm very fortunate just being where I am and where I'm at. I'm really happy that I was able to graduate like this year and not, maybe like a year or 2 years down the line. And while my graduation was ultimately pretty anticlimactic, like, I'm still happy that I was able to get through that, like, despite it being possibly one of the worst years in living memory, for most people. So I'm trying to kind of just keep things in perspective, kind of put yourself in other people's shoes and that sort of thing. So I feel like it's again, it's good to keep up to date on current information and that sort of thing, and just sort of maintain while trying to maintain sort of a healthy kind of life balance too. it's hard. I understand it's definitely hard, and I don't think that, again, everybody has essentially the privilege to do these kinds of, to kind of be in a position where I am. So I kind of want to keep myself, you know, being like aware of a lot of things that are going on, and sort of, maintain that throughout the rest of my life without kind of being too like self-absorbed and that sort of thing. And I've never really felt like that way, but I also want to, there's like, even if you've kind of reached the bare minimum of what it means to not be like a dick, like you could still be better as a person. You can still help contribute. You can uh, you can donate to charity and that sort of thing, which I've been trying my best to do. And whether the effects of that are going to be realized, I'm not sure. But I think that, while I may have talked about a lot of negative things during this episode, like I've also seen a lot of good that's sort of happened within these last couple of weeks. And I should kind of make note of that. So I guess for one instance, Maya Moore, who is a WNBA basketball player, she's considered like one of the greatest to play the game. And I did hear about this, but I didn't really read up on it until recently. She gave up a year of her playing so she could help aid this one man who was wrongly accused of, I forgot what it was exactly. I forgot what the charge was. It might have been murder. I'm not really sure. I feel like I should, be more clear in that. But he was wrongly accused of a crime he didn't commit, and he's denied. He's claimed not guilty in every instance when this case was brought up, and he was like sentenced to something like 40 or 50 years in prison. And so she decided to kind of help aid in that process, and relatively recently he was released. And so I feel like that's good news. I think that if like someone of that stature who is able to kind of put in that effort for someone, it gives me some hope. Like there's a lot of negative timelines, headlines that are clouding up my timeline. But I think it's also good to kind of keep that kind of, even these kinds of victories where an innocent person is released, like that's very hopeful in a case, like those types of people, like Maya Moore, and also people that like the scientists that are working on the vaccine, that are informing the public about this virus. Like if there's people like that are kind of able to bring these kinds of things to the public, I feel like there's some level of hope, I'm trying to be more optimistic in a sense, I think that's reasonable for the most part. I think another thing is that I've definitely sort of reflected on it a little bit, is that how science has always kind of had like an uphill battle with just everything society, right? And in this whole situation, it's no different, right? You have an administration that's very anti-science, and you have a lot of people that are, anti-science. So I want to commend everyone that's working in the medical field, that's working to develop a vaccine. That's the people that are informing the public about, everything that's going on, and sort of being, presenting themselves as level-headed, like it's hard for me to imagine myself in that position, without an immense amount of training and research and education, So major props to everyone that's helping to contribute to this whole situation. Yeah, we're gonna leave it at that. Somewhat of a decent note to end on. For anyone that's listening, hope you're staying healthy. Hope you're staying safe. This has been Save the Semantics, signing off.